times, the strictest moral codes can often lead to the most atrocious outcomes. Now, for those that may have seemed like I was reading something, it's because, in fact, I was. I don't know exactly where I got this quote from. I don't remember because of all the research that I do. With that being said, though, it is not mine, but I think it is a phenomenal applicatory statement that could be used and harnessed for many different apparatuses that we see going on in today's day and age, with respect to, the beep boop, as we call it, with respect to so many other things, the UFO phenomenon, the financial alleged impending crisis and things like that. With that being said, though, welcome back, folks, to another episode of Let's Get Banned. Today's episode is called Why Skinwalkers May Be Necessary, United States Air Force is Scared Shitless, and the rubber duck UFO and angel hair. We're going to be covering all of that. So with that being said, let's jump into what angel hair is. Now, for those that have been watching the show for a while, you'll know, in fact, that we have covered this, not extensively per se, but to a fair amount. But let's take a look. According to Wikipedia, angel hair, or siliceous cotton, is a sticky fibrous substance reported in connection with UFO sightings or manifestations of the Virgin Mary. It has been described as being like a cobweb or a jelly. Now, take a look, by the way, folks. You see how it says here, folklore in brackets? Again, the definitions are out there, but simply because it's pseudoscience or folklore, or you name it, it's not regarded as anything to be prominently displayed on the, the highest levels of academia. Anyways, and I quote, "It is named for its similarity to fine hair or spider webs, and in some cases, the substance has been found to be the web threads of migrating spiders. Reports of angel hair say that it disintegrates or evaporates within a short time of forming," which, by the way, before I go on, this actually tends to be the case with a lot of alleged experiencers who have had this sort of angel hair or UFO dust or alien, substance fall on top of them or fall near them. Angel hair is an important aspect of the UFO religion realism, and one theory among ufologists is that it is created from ionized air sleeting off an electromagnetic field that surrounds a UFO, end quote. Now, if we scroll down, we'll see that there have been sightings over Nuremberg in Germany, also, the miracle at Fatima and things like this in France. But it happens all over the place. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people seem to have glazed over the topic of conversation pertaining to Christopher Mellon and Joe Rogan. In addition to that, there was a reference there that Mr. Mellon and Mr. Rogan were speaking to that was corresponding to, again, I know I've brought this up quite extensively lately, but just bear with me, the podcast with Joe Rogan, James Fox, and Jacques Vallée. And Jacques Vallée, according to Christopher Mellon, seems to be in possession of at least a dozen different types of metallurgies that cannot be explained in one way or another, pertaining to the overall dramatic amount of isotopic organization within these metallurgies that would cost billions, if not trillions of dollars for us to do. Interestingly enough, though, Mr. Vallée specifies that there is in fact some type of what you would call angel hair or dust that has fallen around the certain vicinities in which UFOs have been seen going and coming from and taking off. Now, let's take a look at this Reddit post right over here. A lot of you might be saying, Dave, what the heck, Reddit? What's going on here? Well, folks, sometimes open conversation in the form of an open dialogue tends to be the best, in my humble opinion, and I think this suits it perfectly. So let's take a look. Angel hair is a phenomenon barely talked about. What do we know about it? Posted by u/overpt about a day ago as of the time I'm recording this. Thank you, my friend, for even bringing this up within the r/UFO subreddit in general. Let's take a look at this right over here. UFOs over football stadium in 1954, Davey D comments in this article called Glitter. This link, folks, I'm not going to click on it, I will just explain. This link takes us to a BBC article pertaining to mass, I guess you could say, not psychosis, although it was attempted to be brushed off in that regard, but mass sightings of UFOs made by many, many thousands of people over top. Again, a football stadium in 1954. Now, take a look at this right here. Girl with the dress, thank you so much, because I was able to ascertain the veracity of her claim here, but she says, fascinating. According to this article, the angel hair was made of boron, silicone, calcium, and magnesium. They compare it to spider silk, which is a protein made of nitrogen, oxygen, calcium, and hydrogen. Okay, just writing this for visibility. I'm not a chemist and have no clue what it could be or anything like that. Now, end quote. The reason I bring this up, folks, is because this is going to transition us into the Skinwalker topic, and this is going to get a little complicated, but to understand it, let's first take a look at a document right over here called The Consciousness of the Atom by Alice A. Bailey in 1961 and renewed its copyrights were renewed in 1989 by Lucis Trust. And for those of you that don't know what Lucis Trust is, there's a whole separate connection to be made there, but I will not be making it right now simply because there's no relevance to what we're discussing here. Anyways, take a look at this right over here. This has to do, again, copyright by the Lucis Trust, the field of evolution. All right. Now, if we scroll down some more, here's what we're going to find as well, too. and I quote, "Secondly, there is the point of view which we can best perhaps call supernaturalism. Man becomes conscious that perhaps after all things are not exactly what they seem to be, and that there remains much which is inexplicable. He awakens to the realization that he himself is not simply an accumulation of physical atoms, a material something and a tangible body, but that latent within him is a consciousness, a power, and a psychic nature which link him to all other members of the human family and to a power outside himself which he must perforce explain." End quote. Before I go on, this is interesting because what we're about to read here as we continue in this paragraph is something corresponding to what Mr. Christopher Mellon had mentioned to Joe Rogan, saying that there have been certain individuals working within classified, compartmentalized, I guess you could say, organizational secrecy structures within the DOE, which stands for the Department of Energy, okay? And again, when you're in the Department of Energy, just even on the books, a lot of that stuff is top secret, closed up, classified. Then you have the special access programs, and then you have the stuff that is, funded with the drug, the cartel cash money and all that type of stuff, right? The missing trillions from the Pentagon, you name it. The reason I bring this up is because Christopher Mellon, seemingly overlooked in this conversation, in my opinion at least, brought up the fact that certain scientists within the Department of Energy would experience very, very strong psychic and paranormal, I guess you could say, anomalies or phenomenons in and around a time frame in which a nuclear test was going to be conducted. Let me give you a quick example. There was one scientist, according to Mr. Mellon, that was working in a compartmentalized facility within the Department of Energy in the Los Alamos area, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on the exact location, but you get the idea. What ends up happening is this scientist is walking around their facility, and they know who is and who is not allowed to access this facility, not just because it's compartmentalized, but the physical structure of things is, manifested in the fact that there are people literally working on a floor above them that don't even know that they themselves are, are working towards a larger project, but they get the idea of compartmentalization, so they don't ask any questions. And then all of a sudden, this scientist, according to Christopher Mellon, sees what seems to be, a male, a human male, a man, but he's got one arm, and then the other arm is cut off with a hook, sort of like a pirate, if you will. And he says, "What are you doing here? You're not allowed in here." And then the man leaves this particular room in this classified area within the Department of Energy's, sub-projects and secrecy and all that. The scientist goes after him, and then the guy is gone. So now what's interesting, too, is that we then have another scientist, according to Mr. Mellon, that had very weird dreams and experiences in a paranormal sense that they can describe the night before some type of testing pertaining to an energetic, nuclear plasma substance, if you will. I from my recollection, Mr. Mellon could not get into any details, but again, I do not quote me specifically, but that is the general gist of it. And that is those are just two examples of two separate individuals that do not know one another, work within respected compartmentalized areas within the Department of Energy, and they are experiencing said things. Now, Christopher Mellon also said, too, again, that other scientists have experienced this as well. Now, we also have to play devil's advocate. Could he be lying? Could he be bullshitting? Absolutely. With that being said, the consistency is there relative to the way in which the elites try to show and disseminate the I guess you could say, the form of drop feeding in front of us, while at the same time bullshitting us. And again, I couldn't help but think of the example that Colonel Philip Corso gave of the shack. Right? If someone finds one shack, you're going to give up a little bit of secrets to hide the rest, and you're going to hide in another shack. And then over and over and over until the people looking into finding your shacks can't find it because you've complicated things too much by compartmentalizing way too much, right? Anyways, let's take a look right here. And this document, by the way, folks, I would dare to argue is a form of drop feeding right in front of our faces, especially because it comes from Lucis Trust. But anyways, and I quote, "This is which has led, for instance, to the evolution of the Christian and Jewish point of view, which posits a God outside the solar system, who created it but was himself extraneous to it. These systems of thought teach that the world has been evolved by a power or being who has built the solar system and who guides the worlds aright, keeping our little human life in the hollow of his hand and sweetly ordering all things according to some hidden purpose, which it is not possible for us with our finite minds to glimpse, still less to understand. This is the religious and supernatural point of view and is based on the growing self-consciousness of the individual and in a recognition of his own divinity. Like the point of view of the realistic school, it embodies only a partial truth and needs to be complemented." End quote. I didn't plan to say this, folks, but as I was reading this, I couldn't help but think of those that are in power, whether it's religion, big oil, big pharma, you name it, the power structure of things in general. They wake up every single morning concerned about not just staying rich, but more importantly, staying in power, right? The people at the Vatican, the very corrupt ones, mind you, I'm using the Vatican just as an example that I familiarize myself with the most. But again, they wake up every day, the ones that are really, really depraved, and they think, how can they keep the influence of the church going, respective to, the global aspect of disseminating information these days, right? Now, take a look at this right here. The third line of thought we might call the idealistic, and I quote, "It posits an evolutionary process within all manifestation and identifies life with the cosmic process. It is the exact opposite of materialism and brings the supernatural deity predicated by the religionist into the position of a great entity or life, who is evolving through and by means of the universe, just as man is evolving consciousness through the medium of an objective physical body," end quote. Interestingly enough, okay, what we find here is that if we look with for example, in this paragraph here, at the topic of metaphysics and things like that, I cannot help but think, folks, that this is all relative to that of what we would call the electric universe theory, or what we would call, for example, the simulation theory, if you want to call it. Now, you might be saying, okay, Dave, why are you bringing all this up relative to angel hair? Well, here's a couple of interesting things about angel hair. What I find about angel hair to be so peculiar and consistent within the patterns of my studies is that ultimately we find angel hair to be disseminated within the proposal of ionized air pockets, which also seems to be similar to that which is found within the desert near alleged UFO bases, secret bases, or extraterrestrial bases, if you will. So could it be possible that the ionized air pockets are so clean and so pure in the sense of not respective to climate change or global warming, but respective to the electromagnetic spectrum within multiple different realities and densities pertaining to the vicinity of the craft? Could it be so pure in energy that this is a form of disseminated, not harmful in any way, but disseminated energetically, and this is simply how in this reality that type of material is perceived? Again, sadly, well, not necessarily sadly, but confusingly, I should say, perception is everything, right? Now, you might be saying, okay, Dave, why Skinwalkers? How is the connection here? And why in the title do you say Skinwalkers may be necessary? Well, folks, let me tell you, in my opinion, not saying I'm correct, when we take a look at the Hermetic principles, as above, so below, which is applicatory to so many different aspects of ideologies, religions, you name it, we find that there needs to be an overall balance. Now, yes, we can say from an interdimensional, energetic level, even extraterrestrial level, and of course human level, depravity currently runs the world. Granted, I understand that. However, there still needs to be a balance in order for there to be life in general, and I do believe that the elites know this. Again, just like how they cannot break free will, but they can bend it. Now, at the same time, they understand a balance needs to take place, just like with everything else in life. Empires rise and fall. And when I say that, I also mean, metaphorically, metaphysically, so many other things. Now, here's what's interesting. The 0-point field of consciousness seems to be exempt from this particular cyclical apparatus, if you will, using the infinity symbol or things like this. But the thing is that pertaining to this reality and dimension on Earth, there may be some type of artificial energetic apparatuses that are, causing this to need to be the case for the time being. But what we will find is that skinwalkers tend to be generally seen where angel hair, again, UFO, again, may not always come from alien craft, but where angel hair has been spotted. Interestingly enough, there is also, again, on Coast to Coast AM and with, George Knapp's radio show and all that, there are many individuals willing to come forward these days saying poltergeist activity always occurs either before or after a UFO event. Could there be, depending on the species in which is curating that particular propulsion system, or anti-gravity apparatus, or anti-gravity apparatus around their craft, and their intentions relative to the actions in which they are taking within that particular vicinity contribute to that, in which attracts certain, I guess we could say, beings, some of them Bigfoot, some of them skinwalkers, right? Now, let's take a look at this, thephoenixenigma.com. What are they? Depending on who you ask, and I quote, "A skinwalker can be a number of things. Whereas they are generally thought to be a witch gone bad, it is understood that they are always pure evil. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters and can take on a number of shapes, the most common being a coyote, wolf, deer, bear, or bird. They make people sick, kill livestock, commit murder, control people's minds, rob graves, and are necrophiliacs. A number of Navajos have shared with me personally their encounters with these creatures and have stated that skinwalkers often take the form of a 4 to 5 foot shaggy, foul-smelling creature. Think Cousin It or a short Sasquatch." Okay, now, skinwalkers start out as witches, and these witches sometimes start out as medicine men. The Navajo people are well known for harboring and practicing witchcraft. This has been documented since first European contact and continues through today. The ability to heal and knowledge of the spiritual world are so intertwined that it is impossible to untangle the two, and I couldn't agree more. Medicine men and witches harbor the same knowledge, and witchcraft is seen as the dark side or counterpart to the medicine man, a yin and yang, if you will. Ironic, isn't it, folks? I didn't even plan to bring up the yin and the yang hermetic principles before reading this, but ironic. Even within a closed vicinity of an energetic jail, if you will, okay, we can argue Earth or certain energetic confines within Earth. There still needs to be the as above, so below principle, because without it, you wouldn't know either or from the other, because there would be no opposite definition to describe that, therefore perceive and define that, even if we are not human. Same idea with magnets, positive and negative, right? Magnetism, electrogravity. Anyways, every medicine man while in training will learn the dark arts. This way, they will be equipped to defeat it when the time comes, whereas the good path is always encouraged. It is up to the medicine man to make his choice as to which direction he goes. It's almost as if there is a balance at work here, and it seems to me that the Navajo culture actually cultivates them to some extent, end quote. This is very, very interesting, and now why do I say that? Because if we take a look right over here, we'll find that legendsofamerica.com. In the Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. Now, interestingly enough, here's what we're going to find. The Navajo are part of a larger culture area that also includes the Pueblo people, Apache, Hopi, Ute, and other groups that also have their own versions of the skinwalker, but each includes a malevolent witch capable of transforming itself into an animal. All right? Now, end quote. Before I go on, the reason I'm bringing this up relative to the repetition of what we just covered here in this article is because we need to get a ground and firm understanding of what we're going to be looking at pertaining to this right over here. MysteryWire.com. New book, and I quote, exposes secrets inside ATIP and OSAP. And the reason we know this is brought up is because if we'll find here that through Robert Bigelow, right, who, coincidentally enough, partnered with NASA for BAAS, B-A-A-S, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced. I forgot the last acronym definition. Excuse me. However, let's take a look at this right over here, and I quote. Mainstream media outlets reported in December 2017 that a secret study dubbed ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, had received $22 million in black budget funds, money secured in part by former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and a few Senate colleagues for a study of UFOs. But that scenario is wrong. The Pentagon did spend $22 million on a secret study, and the investigation went way beyond UFOs, and it wasn't called ATIP. The correct acronym was OSAP, the Advanced Weapons System Application Program. End quote. Before I go on, I want to make it very clear that in Christopher Mellon's podcast with Joe Rogan, he said that, okay, first off, we all know this, by the way, everyone, it's kind of an open secret at this point where they always change the different acronyms and what they stand for and all that, so that, just sort of like the Carl Sagan story, when Carl Sagan went to NORAD and he asked for UFOs, they said, we call them UCTs, unidentified correlating targets. It's just a bunch of bullshit to mislead and what have you. But the reason I bring this up is because Christopher Mellon mentioned that Congress is not privy to any type of weapons development respective to the compartmentalization programs within the DOE, the Department of Energy, the DOD, the Department of Defense, and that doesn't even include the private contracting experiments, which, with the dark budgets, let alone the black budgets. What about the dark budgets, or the dark projects, that are funded purely by the cash, by the drug money, cash, and all that stuff? Think about it, folks. Now, take a look at this right over here. The program was first proposed and later managed by a career intelligence analyst and rocket scientist named Dr. James Lasatsky, who spent much of his career working for the Defense Warning Office within the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. In 2007, Lasatsky became interested in stories about bizarre activity and unknown aerial phenomenons reported in and around a property known as Skinwalker Ranch in northeastern Utah. Okay, now take a look at this. In the summer of 2007, Lasatsky met the owner of the ranch, Las Vegas businessman Robert Bigelow, and visited the property where he had a profound encounter with the unknown. That experience led directly to the creation and funding of OSAP, end quote. It just goes to show you, folks, that when you have hundreds of millions, and I'm not trying to shit on Robert Bigelow at all, because I do have a lot of respect for him in a lot of regards, but with that being said, we have to play devil's advocate. But it just goes to show you that when you have hundreds of millions of dollars to burn with a handful of the right connections, you will be let in on certain secrets and aspects within that of the United States government, because as Christopher Mellon said with the podcast with Joe Rogan, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, he said, again, the way in which there's compartmentalization between that of private industry, private contractors, and we know who he's talking about realistically, come on, and the government and certain departments of the defense agencies and all that stuff, it's like a Venn diagram, he said, in terms of a visual sense. There is some overlapping there. However, he said, when people, again, this is according to Christopher Mellon, not saying he's right just because of his credentials, but he said as well, too, He goes, people think that the government is very leak prone. He goes, when it comes to the Defense Department, he goes, not even close. He goes, there's a big misconception in that regard. People sum it up as the government being this whole big body, when really it's major branches that don't really know what's going on, irrespective of others, I guess you could say, others knowing certain projects and others not knowing. Right now, the reason I say in this title that the United States Air Force is scared shitless, and I literally mean that, is because there have been off the record individuals that have told me personally that there are certain individuals behind the scenes that do not want things like this to get out, and they already are not happy with the form of disclosure that is advancing relative to the mass disclosure or some form of mass public disclosure, right? However, there are also individuals that are very happy that this is coming forward. Now, take a look at this right here. Exclusive. New shakeup coming to Space Force acquisition, according to BreakingDefense.com. Congress can hold politicals accountable, not so much with the uniformed officers, one former DOD official said. Again, before I go on, end quote, it's just like what Christopher Mellon said and Jacques Vallée and Bob Lazar, you name it. Try certain elements of the presidential administration, whether it was Clinton, not necessarily Bush, because he, in my opinion, he was a puppet for Cheney, so like whatever. I didn't hear anything about Bush asking anyways, but Obama and Clinton, Bill Clinton, asking about UFOs and asking for certain footage that they would hear through certain individuals, you know, through the pipeline of the government that is out there. The United States Air Force would just say, oh, no, we don't know. We don't have it. We're adamant that there's no such thing as the footage. Simple as that. And I think that's exactly what they're referring to here when they say not so much with the uniformed officers. It's just like when George H.W. Bush was the head of the CIA at the time under Jimmy Carter, if I'm not mistaken, and his subordinates asked Mr. George H.W. Bush, sir, should we brief Jimmy Carter on the UFO thing or on the black budget stuff? Sorry. He goes, no chance. Again, right? So interesting how this works. So take a look at this right here. The Department of the Air Force on Monday will put in place a realignment of initial space policy development that in the past has been directly under the purview of the Air Force Secretary, handing them instead to the office of the Space Force Chief, Breaking Defense has learned. An Air Force spokesperson confirmed the planned shift in an email this evening. However, Air Force officials later tonight in a phone call stressed that decision-making authority over policy continues to reside within the civilian chain of command, starting with Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall and ultimately going through Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. End quote. Okay. This is interesting because you see there's already internal conflicts. Now, we can argue very strongly as well. This may be just a form of propaganda put out there to deceive us in general. But at the same time, I also think there's too much ruckus going on behind the scenes relative, not just to disclosure, but relative to the sort of mass awakening of people pertaining to, you know, what's going on with the pandemic and things like that, for this to be a little bit too deliberate in a certain sense. Now, the reason I bring this up is because, interestingly enough, around the same time, we had this particular footage, which was the rubber duck UFO footage come out. So let's play it and let's watch it. Let's see what we're looking at here. So the title reads, Empire Strikes Quack. Leaked U.S. spy plane footage shows rubber duck-shaped UFO flying at 200 miles per hour while being tracked for 40 minutes. Now, a lot of people have been saying, you know, this is some type of interdimensional UFO or something like this. Mick West, who's quite known extensively for attempting to debunk things to the point where some of his debunkings, in my opinion, actually are conspiracy theories in and of themselves. But in some cases, he does a very good job of debunking and using, you know, theories to suit the facts, not facts to suit the theories, in my opinion. So we saw that footage right there, okay? I'm going to play it again one more time just by refreshing the page. And look, I'm going to be honest with you folks. I do think that it is simply a drug, it is a drone of some sorts pertaining to surveillance of the cartels and what have you. With that being said, though, at the same time, to be honest, I also bring this up because there have been alleged reports of angel hair being found in and around the vicinity of this particular, where this sighting was, with this sort of, you know, duck UFO. Doesn't mean that this was an alien craft, so to speak. A UFO, sure. Because in pure theory, UFOs, I mean, everyone, you know, sort of, we know that it's unidentified, doesn't mean it's alien, but when you say UFO, people automatically think alien. So UFO, yes. Alien, I don't think so, in my humble opinion. Now, with that being said, too, when we take a look at this footage, we'll also see that there are some, you know, interesting things to bring up as it pertains to its movement and what have you. But again, if we take a look at some of the frequent airplanes flying around there that Mick West also helped to sort of bring up as well. And again, I'm not a fan of Mick West, but when people use logic and things like that in an attempt to debunk, we have to be consistent and we have to be fair, in my humble opinion, right? So the reason I bring this up is because there were lots of airplanes seen coming and going within the vicinity, okay, of where this drone or this UFO, if you will, was spotted. I'm not, just because I don't think it was an alien craft doesn't mean I should call it a drone. But anyways, it's interesting because Mick West tried to use that to propose and debunk that whole footage there by saying, well, if there's lots of commercial airline flights going on in and around that area, obviously that, they wouldn't be testing things there. But what if they were? Because you're hiding it in plain sight. And I bring that up because a perfect example would be Bob Lazar, if you believe him, of course, saying that back when he was working at S4 Los Alamos, he said that they would do the more higher altitude tests relative to the base in which they were working on for the retrieved alien craft on Wednesday nights. Because Wednesday nights just so happened to be the evenings every week on average where there was far less amount of cars on the highway. Therefore, when you would do high altitude tests, it would be much more difficult for anyone driving to see, especially at nighttime, right? So now that brings us to this right over here. Interestingengineering.com. A new Nikola Tesla engineer devises UFO patents for the U.S. Navy. The government is experimenting with limitless energy and the ability to modify space-time. Again, these patents have been there. We've covered some of them in the show before, even about a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. Interesting that all it takes is one article to bring it into the mainstream media. Now, all of a sudden, oh, you hear about the patents? Come on, right? But anyways, the reason I bring this up is because we'll find here that there is a compact, quote, fusion reactor, a gravitational wave generator, and even a space-time modification weapon. The technology involved could impact reality itself, claims its inventor, whose maverick audacity rivals that of Nikola Tesla. Now, this is, again, Salvatore Pais or Caesar Pais that some had also mentioned on a live stream very recently. I do believe that this particular individual is in fact a non-existent, and if they are existent, then they are in fact a cover or front for what's going on within that of the government. Again, just like how they compartmentalize things in the private contracting industry when it comes to patents. I'm sure they have a secret patent office, but at the same time, sort of like they had the FISA court that Snowden exposed. I also think too that they have, for example, other individuals that they use as just fronts for patents that are made public for the sake of, again, telling the loose conglomerate of those responsible for overseeing STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, that listen, we have these patents. It's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to not furthering your studies within that of Harvard, Oxford, Yale, Stanford, MIT, because we already have it. So, your lectures, your presentations, your research, if you want more grants in the future, don't look into this stuff. And these patents would be a sign of that, or an implicatory sign of that, or signal, if you will. But take a look. Laser augmented turbojet propulsion system. This was patented in 2006. Craft using an inertial mass reduction device. Electromagnetic field generator and method to generate an electromagnetic field. Notice how a lot of these are circles, cubes, triangles. Again, even the way in which there's a visual depiction of the patent seems to be quite energetically, I guess you could say, infused, if you will. Plasma compression fusion device, again, filed 2018, again, granted filed 2017. I mean, you take a look at that, filed 2004, granted 2006, excuse me, I made a mistake saying it was filed in 2006, it was actually filed in 2004. So you might be saying, okay, Dave, why do you bring all this up? What does this have to do with Skinwalkers? What does this have to do with angel hair, angel dust, whatever you want to call it? Well, when we take a look at the fact that angel dust and angel hair was studied so significantly relative to that of those within the USAF community, there is agency, if you will, there is in fact an esoteric and energetic connection pertaining to those in which skinwalkers seem to be near a lot of this angel dust and angel hair, not because they emit it themselves, but because they are attracted to the purified energy in which the ionized air pockets seem to disseminate from these alien craft. Now, I'm not saying all alien craft, right? I'm not saying at the same time as well, too, that it is strictly alien. There may have been some reverse engineered apparatuses like we're about to see right here from the military that by nature disseminate this type of angel hair or angel dust. But when we look at the composition of different metallurgies composed of these craft, I cannot help but think that the vast majority of angel hair or angel dust cited, okay, is in fact that of an extraterrestrial origination. But let's take a look at this video right over here, and you'll see why in a second I'm bringing this up. So let's take a look. You see that right there, folks? Let me just make it a little bigger. There we go. So let's take a look. Seemingly, I would say this is military, using what seems to be a TR-3B of some type. And we notice right there, it explodes, and then watch it shoot up. You see that right there? Now, again, to our visual perception, the TR-3B or whatever craft that was may in fact have been caught in the explosion, but not necessarily. Notice something as well too. Notice the shape in which the way it shoots up. Maybe because of its speed, it looked like it transformed or morphed into some type of cigar-shaped apparatus. But interestingly enough, there is angel hair found, or angel dust, if you will, found within the immediate 6 to 12 hours vicinity within said sites. Now, I'm not saying this particular site of the video we just watched right here, but I'm saying relative to the way in which in the Middle East specifically, there seems to be TR-3Bs that are literally using very, very silent, if not like almost non-existent relative to what our hearing can perceive in terms of the frequency ranges and all that when they blow things up. Again, why would this technology not have been used within, say, for example, Operation Desert Storm in order to fully clean up all of the remaining evidence, if you will? Now, let's take a look at this right here. The Electric Doppelganger by Rudolf Steiner. This is going to bring all of it full circle, because when we look at the fact that there are beings that are, for some reason, whether they consciously know it or not, and when I say beings, I mean skinwalkers, alleged ghosts and things like that, they are attracted to this angel dust and angel hair. Let's take a look at this right here. In the 19th century, natural science discovered that the nervous system is permeated by electrical forces, and natural science was right about that. However, again, as we say, we get our best tricks from nature, right? However, if science holds, or scientists believe that our nerve forces, which belong to us and provide a basis for our life of thought, have anything to do with electrical currents passing through our nerves, then they are mistaken. For the electrical currents are the forces that are placed into our being by that other being, whom I have just described, and do not belong to our being at all. We do also carry electrical currents within us, but they are of a purely Riemannic nature. Medical science tells us that electrical currents, so-called action potentials, are built up and transmitted both in our brain and within the rest of our nervous system. These are measurable with an ECG or EEG. If a current flows, then this is a message that is transmitted, which triggers the relevant chemical reaction. If no current flows, then this is also a message and no chemical reaction takes place. End quote. Now, before I go on, is this not relevant or similar, at least in a very loose way, of that of the VMAT2 gene or the God gene, removing the God gene? Does that not remind us of that, folks? Again, think about it. It is combining the esotericism in which it crosses over to that of the not the metaphysical, into the physical realm, particularly this specific dimension. Okay, and interestingly enough, that's also corresponding for a metaphor or an analogy of what Christopher Mellon said to Joe Rogan about how private industry and government, there's sort of like a Venn diagram that overcrosses, if you want to call it, if you were to visualize it, in the way in which some of their projects overlap. Interesting the way in which that sort of symbolism and visualization is representative in that of, again, the human body. Okay, I know that might be a bit of a stretch of a connection, but you folks see, I think, what I'm getting at here. Our entire nervous system is pervaded by such currents which convey stimuli to the brain that are received via sense organs from the outer world. They also coordinate via the nerve pathways and nerve cells the movements of our muscular apparatus in response to sensory stimuli. For example, if the surface of our hand conveys a strong stimulus from a hot plate, our arm reacts instantly and our hand is immediately retracted. This reaction requires neither a thought process nor an emotional response. The soul remains completely excluded in this case, while the body reacts with a spontaneous reflex. Okay, the Riemannic being who lives with us in our body is therefore necessary for our earthly consciousness. We would not be able to live without this being, which is also apparent from the fact that our life ends the moment no electrical current flows through our nervous system. Again, when we take a look again, that is simply pertaining to the physical aspect of things in this particular dimension. There are many other dimensions, and we have our respective nervous systems within each dimension, if that makes sense. At the time, however, Rudolf Steiner also identifies this Riemannic doppelganger as the originator of illness, specifically illness that depended upon geographical conditions. Okay, why? Again, this has to do with connecting to ley lines and all that. Why is that? Is it because the Riemannic doppelganger is himself subject to geographical conditions, since the Earth is also permeated by electromagnetic forces? These forces are aligned according to the Earth's mountain ranges and are particularly strong where mountain chains run from south to north rather than from east to west. Again, interesting. This has to do with Admiral Byrd's, corresponding evidence of, the of the South Pole and the North Pole, right? Having to do with the Earth being a magnet, entirely that of a magnet, having to do with Nikola Tesla, Walter Russell's universal one, the other Russian, I forgot, please forgive me off the top of my head, Mr. Leakskin, if I'm Leadskin, I think I said his name incorrectly, but it was on our most previous Let's Get Banned, if I'm not mistaken. We see here Rudolf Steiner points out that these forces activate within the human nervous system correspond to such electrical and magnetic forces. He then indicates that humanity in the 20th century will be in a position to transfer these forces to machines. Now, this is where it kind of gets scary, because now we think about AI, we think about quantum computing, that form of integration within the most secretive level of the potentiality, okay, folks, of quantum computing being emergence between esotericism and artificial intelligence, bringing that full circle. And that's not a problem. I wouldn't have an issue with it if if the motherfuckers at the top weren't so depraved. Right? Take a look at this. I have frequently pointed out, quite deliberately, including in public lectures, these are Steiner's words, that human consciousness is associated with forces of destruction. Into our nervous system we die. These forces, these death forces, will become even more powerful, and the connection will be made between the death forces in the human being, which are related to electromagnetic forces, and outer machine forces. In a sense, the human being will be able to let his thoughts flow into the machine forces. As yet undiscovered forces within the human being will be discovered, forces that have an effect on outer electrical and magnetic forces, end quote. Again, does that not resemble that of gang stalking, of doppelgangers? I am of the extent in which we have to understand we cannot always look at things with pure scientific principalistic foundations in an objective format, because we don't have all of the pure scientific principalistic foundations. You see what I'm saying, folks? So anyways, let's take a look. To design the machine, my coworkers and I tried to imitate some of the known operations of the live brain. This aspect led me to study neurology and eventually to give lectures on the possibilities of copying an extremely simplified model of the living brain for man-made machines. All right? Look at this. As the only one among his colleagues, von Neumann studied neurology alongside his work on developing the first computers. That is why no one apart from him noticed what they were actually doing in developing these machines. Transmission of all information in the computer, just as in the nervous system, is based on the polarity of current and no current. Again, hermetic principles, as above, so below, positive, negative, just like magnets. In the case of the human organism, however, a significant amount of chemistry also plays a role in terms of what are known as messenger substances or neurotransmitters. Again, the connection is right there of esotericism with that of our biological bodies having electrical impulses translate to that in which we would understand and perceive respective to our minds in this present time in this dimension. Now, I'm not going to go on any further, because we have to understand that and I quote here, the nature, actually I will go on, of the personal computer is exactly as Rudolf Steiner described the Arimanic doppelganger, end quote. Okay. This is what I'm trying to say, folks. Skinwalkers being attracted to angel dust, why they might be necessary as sort of the negative balance relative to that of very mysterious locations geomagnetically around the world, and things like that, pertaining to that of the ley lines, which were also mentioned here in this particular document in Article 2. You know, when you have a very powerful computer, even if it's a beautiful brand new computer, you know how it gets dusty, whether it's a laptop or a desktop? You know when you have to just sort of blow the dust off of it? Could it be possible that the angel hair is sort of like the purified version of dust coming off of the craft because of how, again, advanced it is? Because we can argue very strongly, if we took a computer, for example, okay, and we, put it, dropped it, 500, 1,000 years ago to a civilization, a human civilization, 500 or 1,000 years ago, and they tried to operate it, and they found ways to operate it, but they couldn't figure out how it worked, but dust started coming off of it from the fan of the tower or the fan, the fan within the laptop. They would probably describe it as some type of angelic, mystical thing that is a godly device that is manifesting some sort of, something for the people to be given. But it's just dust. You see what I'm saying? Perception. Sadly, but also interestingly and positively. Okay? So, take a look at this. I will end with this. And so it is indeed by the way, not to mention all the similarities between what we see now in quantum computing, CPUs, integrated circuit chips, and, the different structures around the world that are reported by institutions but not covered extensively relative to other things they cover and bolster all over the planet in terms of advertisements and what have you, like the Rockefeller and Rothschild Smith Museum and things like that. And the nature of the personal computer is exactly as Rudolf Steiner described the Arianic doppelganger. And so it is indeed the case that we go through our lives with a soul and this doppelganger who is cleverer, far cleverer than we are. This being is highly intelligent but possesses a Mephistophelian intelligence, an Ahrimanic intelligence, as well as a very strong will, a will that is much closer to the forces of nature than our human will, which is tempered by our life of feeling, end quote. Again, our attachment to materialistic objects and things like this, a potential mind control grid that is suppressing us and all that, right? Now, let's take a look at what Mephistophelian is, and it refers to, over here, wicked or fiendish, okay? Which is very similar to how we see demons in the paranormal aspect of things, right? You see the connection there? These demons, some of them could actually have been some form of life on Earth prior to this, or they could be interdimensional in so many different ways. But my gosh, I'm even blown away myself at some of these connections, if you will. With that being said, folks, we'll find here that the computer is a cold machine with a very high level of intelligence and an uncompromising will, otherwise known as efficiency. All right, even our economic life with all its money flows is today largely controlled by these machines, end quote. Machines. We can call them machines, doppelgangers, interdimensional beings. It all has to do with the intertwinement of the control structure relative to that of the banking system, the military-industrial complex, and all of that. But I don't need to go over that. You folks know much better, even in some cases much better than I do. So with that being said, let me know what you think, folks, and we'll catch you very, very soon. Cheers.